A very simple task right now. You'll hear plenty from me and the rest of us later this morning, so we'll save all that. But welcome. Very glad you're here. Look forward to speaking individually with all of you as we have time over these next several days. My mission here this morning is simply to introduce someone very familiar to you, Brian Hallowell, who's going to introduce our keynote speaker this morning. Brian?
Thank you, Eric, and welcome everyone. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, I also want to say two things. One, this is all of us here, so I would encourage you to move even further towards the front unless you've gotten completely settled, just so we can have a bit of a cozier situation. And two, I want to introduce Fabio Parasecoli, who's the director of the Food Studies program here at the New School. The Food Studies program in the New School has graciously agreed to host the Publishers Meeting and the Edible Institute over the next few days, and I wanted to invite Fabio to tell you a little bit about what the New School is doing in the food area.
Good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Fabio Parasecoli. I'm the coordinator of the Food Studies program here. We're very excited to collaborate with the Edible magazines and with the Edible Institute. Very briefly, we're very happy to announce that the Food Studies program is now becoming a major and a minor undergraduate level. We're also working to create more possibilities at the graduate level. All our classes, which is very important for us, are open to the general public for continuing education. So in the tradition of the New School, we want to keep our activities, our classes, our research open to the community. For that reason, we also organize a series of events during the year on topics ranging from politics to agriculture to media, and all those events are taped and put online. I know many of you are not from New York, so I cannot invite you to come, but I do invite you to check our videos out. There is amazing material. Dan participated in a panel on dining and design last year, very successful. All our videos are available on our website called The Inquisitive Eater, and there is a section called Archives. You can find everything there. Media communications are very important for us. Many of our students do come here to learn those things. So we're very happy to welcome you here, and we hope in the next few days we'll have more opportunity to talk and get to know each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabio, and thanks to the New School for hosting us. Nowadays, chefs are expected to be so much more than a chef. They are community leaders, food policy lobbyists, food security activists, and food system change makers. As Chef Jose Andres notes in his Twitter bio, "I am not a chef, I'm a storyteller." This new standard aside, Dan Barber has never been content to just stay behind the stove. In fact, to say that Dan Barber is not content to stay behind the stove is an understatement. So it's not surprising that his first book is a 400-page tour de force that puts the issues of genetic diversity, rangeland management, and food history front and center, while relegating recipes to the back and to footnotes. And I think there's probably room for a companion cookbook to come out in the next year or two for all the recipes that we might desire for the polenta corn and the passive foie gras and the yogurt that Dan writes about. While Dan's contemporaries are putting out glossy coffee table books where the recipes play starring role, supported by vignettes of food makers, Barber decided to turn this ratio on its head with meticulously researched and carefully constructed arguments that feel much more Wendell Berry than Julia Child. Barber's demonstrated his intellectual prowess and urge to put chefs on a higher plane. He developed a sustainability curricula for the International Culinary Center. He organized a global gathering of chefs recently around the importance of seeds, where the god of molecular gastronomy, Ferran Adrià, called Dan the most influential chef on the planet. This is coming from someone who many people would consider the most influential chef on the planet. Dan's restaurant, Blue Hill, is tethered to an agricultural education center that hosts a youth farm conference and convenes all manner of discussions on the future of what we eat. As Dan said in his 22-minute TED Talk from 2009 that has garnered more than 1 million views, "I've seen the future and it's going to be delicious." Dan is chef and co-owner of Blue Hill and Blue Hill at Stone Barns. He's received the James Beard Award for Best Chef in New York City and for Outstanding Chef in the Nation. In 2009, he was named one of the world's most influential people by Time magazine, and Dan's efforts to create a consciousness around our everyday food choices have also led him to be invited to the World Economic Forum to present in Davos among many of the world's leaders. Yes, Dan has some chops, and not just in the kitchen. I'm very honored to call Dan a friend and colleague and neighbor, and we are delighted to have him here with us today. So please join me in welcoming Dan Barber.
Thank you. So, well, thank you. Thank you for that. That's very nice. It's a good way to start the day. So I'm gonna start what I want to say by lobbing something out here. It's probably not what you are expecting after that introduction, or from a chef like me. But I'll say this: at Farm to Table, the movement that you all are helping to create, that we all support, that may be the most exciting social movement in America, does not really work. And I say that despite the best efforts of all of us, including farmers, because Farm to Table hasn't shifted in any fundamental way the political or economic forces that are shaping our food system. For proof of that, we don't need a lot of proof of that, but for proof of that, the latest proof is just the census that was released earlier this week. For those of you who saw it, it's a very depressing document. There's some good news for the food movement, but there's a lot of bad news. And to me, the bad news overwhelms the good news. Such things as in just the last 5 years, when this movement has really gotten its legs, we have lost nearly 100,000 farms. And we are at a point now where 1% of our farmers are feeding more than 50% of the people in this country. So what I'd like to do this morning, besides not being so depressing, is to talk about how, for the future, we might look at this movement and our work just a little differently, and think about how to change not only how we source some of our ingredients that we eat or that I cook with or that you write about in your magazines, but also just how we think about food in a larger context. And I wanted to do that through a meal. So I made this sort of allegorical meal in my restaurant, and I wanted to describe it for you. The first course is a whole wheat bread. It's made from an emmer wheat, which actually it's a local emmer wheat, and so I should say that I find that iconoclastic because, well, for one thing, we serve it as a course in our restaurant, so that's sort of iconoclastic. You get a course of bread, but mainly it's iconoclastic because it's 100% local, and for most people, including all of us, I think, in this room, that's the idea of that is a little bit of an oxymoron. We think of wheat in these monoculture terms, 1,000-acre fields in Kansas and whatnot. But for a chef like me, and what I've learned through the research of this book, is that it's totally ironic, if only because we are so religious about sourcing and cooking with the best ingredients. You know, we're loyal to the farmers markets and the rooftop gardens, and we serve only the best vegetables and the most free-range meats, and on and on. But when it comes to wheat, and here I'm calling out wheat specifically to make a larger point, but when it comes to wheat, we cook and bake with what is essentially rotten produce. We eat dead wheat. And I'm not just talking about this stuff, although I am. White flour stripped of its germ in this industrial process. I'm really talking about this. Modern varieties of wheat that have been bred for yield and yield alone, not flavor. So using this kind of wheat, and we, and for the most part, Blue Hill, my restaurants, have very little choice because this is where all of our wheat comes from. But using this wheat, as we do, would be like my arguing that my dinner tonight should be built on these ingredients. So that gets me back to the meaning of this first course, this 100% emmer wheat brioche. It's brought to you by this man, Klaus Martens. Many of you in this room might know of Klaus. He farms 2,500 acres in the Finger Lakes region of New York. 200 years ago, before we settled the Great Plains, this was the hotbed of wheat production. Rochester is the flour city. I always thought that was Flower, but Nabisco is the national baking company, was located in Buffalo. I did all this research, look, all of it got edited out, so I'm trying to show you how smart I've been. I have really fascinating history of grains, but especially wheat is all about New York. But anyway, my point is that Klaus's soils are actually really nicely suited to growing wheat. But he doesn't just farm wheat. He farms a variety of crops. And he grows them in these complementary rotations the same way that farmers have done for hundreds of years. The goal, of course, is to support the long-term health of the soil. He is not growing high-yielding varieties of wheat. He's growing Emmer and Frederick and Bavarian Spelt and heirloom grains that are better suited to this organic system and, of course, far, far more delicious. We grind the wheat to make our own flour every day in the restaurant. And the end result is this really incredible bread. It's nutty, it's aromatic, and it actually tastes like wheat. Anyway, this is the farm to table story. And it's a nice one. Because here I am, I'm supporting a local farmer, I'm resurrecting lost flavors and lost varieties, which is another way of saying a lost way of agriculture. And so the question is, what's wrong with that? And it wasn't until I had this offhand conversation with Klaus many years after I began buying this wheat from him. I was actually on his farm, and I had this moment of epiphany standing in the middle of his field, in which you can really look around you. It's very much like Iowa. I mean, it looks like so you're surrounded by grain fields. I had gone on that trip because I wanted to learn more about what made his wheat so delicious. We were making this brioche with his wheat, and when we ran out of his wheat or there was an interruption, we would get wheat from other sources, and the difference was like really big, like really big. And of course, I knew that somebody who was growing something in a good way, in some ways, it didn't surprise me. Another way, I just couldn't believe with wheat there was such a difference. And so I took this journey to meet him, to get to know him a little bit more and learn, what was going on with his wheat, because it wasn't just the variety. And from the moment I got there, I spent 3 days. He ended up becoming the hero a little bit of my book, and so I spent a lot of time with him. But on this first trip, I spent like 3 days with him, and he never once talked about the wheat. I swear to God, it was like I came for the wheat, and from the moment I was in the field with him till I left, he didn't talk about wheat. He was talking about how he preps his soil. In other words, he was letting me know that the secret to wheat, or the secret to his emmer, is not about the emmer. And I started to realize very quickly on that trip that I had always thought of rotations as this kind of abstract, organic dictate. But really, as I left, I realized that it's very much a recipe. For all of our thinking about agriculture and all of our writing about agriculture, we don't have a language to describe the nuts and bolts of truly good farming. And it's probably for good reason. It's 1,000 times more complicated than anything I've ever done in my kitchen, and Ferran Adri has ever done in his kitchen. But it is a recipe for the soil that dictates the true sustainability of his farming systems, and I would argue most farming systems, and I don't think anyone would disagree with that. But I hope you'll bear with me for just a couple of minutes, because I've tried to distill Klaus's thinking about this into something relatively simple. And that's with the hope that I'll kickstart a deeper conversation. After I finish, we can have a conversation, you have a conversation with each other, and hopefully broadcast that in your magazines moving forward. Because it leads to a different relationship between the farm and the table. So let's take that emmer wheat and just like kind of hop into one of Klaus's rotations. I don't know where you start or end on a rotation. There is no starting or ending, so we're just going to sort of parachute into one of his rotations, and I'm more or less starting with the spelt, which Klaus plants a lot of. Most of it goes to a kosher matzah maker, which is a whole nother story that got cut from my book, but it's a fascinating one. He works with Orthodox rabbis to get the most pure spelt, kosher spelt, and it's a fascinating look into the old world and the technology of New World and the wisdom of a farmer like Klaus. But spelt, for our purposes now, he uses it not just to sell to the Orthodox contingent, but he finds it to be this perfect soil builder because it has these deep root systems, and the straw that Klaus, after harvesting the spelt, the straw Klaus plows back into the soil and gives the soil this like very hearty boost of carbon. Anyway, at the same time, he's interseeding, which is to say double planting, a nice cover crop for winter in clover. Clover fixes nitrogen from the atmosphere in this sort of neat little trick and supplies it to the soil. And then he's ready to plant corn, which is a pretty standard variety. He grows organic corn for bag feed. The irony of this sort of whole deal that I'm unrolling here is that like 80% of his profits come from this crop. We don't eat it, so it's all bag feed. But the price of organic feed, corn feed, soy and corn, it's incredible. And he's doing really well, Klaus. Like, not just well, he's doing really well. He just bought his third combine. He's farming, what we would consider now, I guess, a small farm. Technically, he's a mid-sized farm, but he's a small grain farm, 2,000 acres, nothing. And he's doing it in upstate New York, which is incredible. So, but he's, I just want to be honest about the whole thing. He's rolling with the corn, and he doesn't, he's not shy about it. He's not proud of it. But it's interesting that, in his rotation thinking, this isn't just about the wheat, which is, I think I'm going to make very clear, but I also got to make clear that the thing that's driving this is the corn. And that's not his doing. That's of course the marketplace, but we can talk about that later. Anyway, after the corn comes out and he has a nice harvest of corn, he goes immediately to a mustard, any kind of mustard cover crop that immediately restores some depleted nutrients, because corn sucks out so much of the nutrients of the soil, and it's tired. And then he needs another rotation of a leguminous crop. So he's got this sort of interesting choice here. Does he go like with soybeans? Does he go with kidney beans? That's sort of market related. If he's getting a really good price for soy, he will go. He doesn't like to do that because he feels that after the corn, he needs more of a boost for his soil fertility, and he'll go with kidney beans. The problem with kidney beans, doesn't really make any money. He kind of loses money on the crop. I use them at the restaurant. They're fantastic. I don't really like kidney beans. I never knew what a kidney bean could be till I had this. And for him, he plants it essentially it goes into canned kidney beans, which get mixed in with everyone else's. And it's really a shame. But anyway, he's got this kind of what do you call it, Sophie's choice, and he chooses it accordingly. Actually, if the weather conditions don't allow it, he goes to something like millet, because millet grows in pretty much any weather condition, dry weather condition. And I'll take the millet and I'll put it into the, he'll round out his feed mix. Anyway, you slice it, he's basically, breaking even on the deal. And then he goes into rye generally, which builds soil structure, which is a fascinating subject in and of itself. It's a weed suppressor, and of course it's a very good source of carbon. And only then is he locked and loaded and ready to plant our emmer for my brioche. So I go back to Klaus's farm, like a year later. I'm getting more and more interested. And I realized that, I thought I had this recipe for the rotations, and I was repeating this recipe when I spoke or when I was writing about it. And I went back and, the recipe was totally different. It was like a choose-your-own-adventure. So he would go, maybe from spelt to a brassica, depending on market conditions. Depending on what the soil was telling him, which is the huge part of this. He loves brassicas because they're weed suppressors and disease suppressors for his farm. And then he might go often goes with a cover crop like buckwheat. And from there, he's into this other choice, fascinating choice between a barley or a triticale, interseed or not interseeded with a leguminous crop like cowpeas, and only then is he locked and loaded again for the emmer. I could take you through 3,000 other rotations that he does through the farm. I mean, I couldn't, but he could. And each of them are incredibly fascinating because he is in a conversation with his soil. And the market's dictating a little bit, there's no question about it. But the dance here is the soil's leading. And it provides this flavor experience for this wheat that is unparalleled, I think. Okay, so before I get to the next course, this is sort of the end of the course, I sum this up by sort of asking what is the lesson here. And the lesson for me, anyway, this is the first part of my lesson with Klaus, is that I was essentially treating his farm like a grocery store. I was cherry picking. Well, first, I was creating a market for his wheat. So I did some really good stuff because I broadcast this idea of local emmer wheat. I wasn't the first one, but I was really excited about it. I did it, and we served a couple thousand people every week this emmer wheat. We talked about Klaus. We talked about old varieties of wheat. We talked about local grain. I mean, we were hitting all I was like a farm to table, what do you call it, emblem, waving the flag. But the truth was I wasn't supporting anything to support his recipe, right? He may as well have been growing a monoculture of wheat for all I was concerned, because I was choosing what I wanted to choose in a very single-minded way. And truly, the way to support him really was to support the whole system. Because, and I should just stress this point, everything that you're looking at in front of you, everything, unless it has a market for it, like the kidney beans, the rye sometimes, the barley sometimes. But for the most part, everything gets harvested and bagged for feed. Everything. So the value of these grains and the value of the entirety of the system is really only realized through eating meat and drinking milk, right? Or eating eggs. So the question is, why aren't we maximizing the caloric and nutrient benefits by feeding these grains and legumes to people? And in the process, and this is much more the point, I think, for this talk, is maximize Klaus's economy. Because he makes pennies on the dollar for the bag feed. Pennies, except for the corn and the soy. Pennies on the dollar. So that's where my menu and my cooking took this big shift, is we tried to adapt the way we cook and support this whole recipe. So the second course, we've been serving for a couple of years now, this thing called rotation risotto. So we developed this dish that has all of those grains and legumes that you saw before and many, many more. We're up to 15 of them. seeds too, and we fashion it like a risotto. And because there's no rice, doesn't grow rice, there's no wheat. It's really all the crops that go to support the wheat. I guess that's the idea behind it. And since we don't have the starch in this, because rice has all the starch, which is a beautiful thickener in a risotto, we make a puree of the brassicas, like a mustard or a broccoli on the seed, depending on what we have. And that goes to thicken the stew, and we serve it like a risotto. And it kickstarts this nice conversation in the dining room about what the hell's a rotation risotto versus a risotto. It's quite delicious. That's the bottom line. It's really delicious. But it's a good way to draw people's attention to this idea of rotations, which again is this abstract idea, which has become much less abstract to me and more of like the defining issue for helping Klaus. Anyway, several years later, I visited Klaus's farm yet again. And this time, the lesson is like entirely different. Because Klaus had, in the interim, brought pigs into his system. The pigs became part of these rotations. They're fed the discarded holes, for example, of the emmer. They're basically like these dumpster diving pigs. They feed on everything that is a waste product or a compost product. And he now brings them out into the wheat field post-harvest and other fields, but the wheat field especially, and they forage on the stalk. And in the interim, they drop their manure and fertilize the field even more for the next crop. And then he's done the same with chickens. And meanwhile, he continues to evolve the system because he's not just growing bag feed corn anymore, he's growing old varieties of delicious polenta corn. Hudson Valley currently is, I really love this stuff. And he's doing it because he can afford to and because he doesn't like the idea of just growing for bag feed. And he is also growing more barley because of a maltster that opened recently in western Massachusetts. I put them together. When I put them together, I wasn't thinking. I was just like this woman who called me from this place called Valley Malt. It was like just starting and like really needed more barley because of all these microbreweries that are exploding. And all the microbreweries realized that their malt is coming from Europe, that there is no local barley malt. Did she have someone who was growing great barley? I did. And so many people told me, that's impossible. The protein content on barley from Western New York is way too high, and it is going to make cloudy beer, and there's a reason that all the barley malt comes from Europe. And of course, Klaus, took that challenge and ran with it, and now he makes a gorgeous low percentage barley. The interesting thing from this part of the story is he sells 30% of his barley to Valley Malt at 150% profit versus the bag feed. 30%. On a couple thousand acres over the course of time, it's a lot of money. It's a big deal drinking this local beer if you work within the system, I guess is the point that I came to. So I made this course to sort of honor this, which was Klaus's pigs, with the Swapsy Valley polenta, and I made this syrup out of his barley. I made malted barley sauce essentially. Okay, so the system actually continued to evolve, but it goes on and on. He added dairy cattle. So I added a dessert, in this longer version of this thing, I have this dessert. But the dairy cattle are unbelievable. As he says, this cover crop or rocket fuel for ruminants. And he has this really interesting rotation going on with the dairy cattle, and the milk is fabulous. But I can't buy the milk because of distribution issues, and Blue Hill actually is a dairy, so I can't really support Klaus's thing. But the interesting thing for me on this, and I'm just going off script here just for a second, because what it comes down to is to maturely support the system, which is say to continue to complicate the picture, I guess is another way of saying it, which is how Klaus likes to say it, is like I needed to buy veal because he wasn't getting rid of the males that were born on his little dairy now. He wasn't, that's what dairies do. Most of you know that. You take a bull calf and you get it off the farm very, very quickly because it sucks away all the mother's milk and the profits and whatnot. And he keeps them on the mother. Really keeps on the mother. Now, I'm embarrassed to say Blue Hill Farm wasn't keeping their male bull calves on the mothers as long as Klaus keeps it. And he's doing what he feels in his heart. The frickin' veal is unreal. It's unreal. It's just like blows your mind, So, and there's a lot of it, and I do struggle to buy it. Part of the reason I went to no menus in my restaurants because I wasn't selling veal. People still have this tortured view of veal. And also the veal isn't white. It's like really dark, like really dark. And it looks like it's beef, but the flavor is unreal. And it's on its mother, and then it's on some pasture, and then it's slaughtered. And he charges a lot for it. But he's right. He's right. And actually, convincing people to eat more veal is like one way to create a revenue stream for dairies that in New York State that are really increasingly in trouble. Is eat more veal. So, go figure that. Anyway, what's the lesson? And let's just back up and we can have a little bit of a conversation because I don't want to keep talking too much. But it seems to me that the farm to table movement, the way anyway that we have, or the greater public thinks about it, is the wrong way of thinking about the future of good food. In part because it sets us up as end users. It's like really passive, the system. And really what we need to do is start to engage more, us really, and chefs, with people like Klaus. There are a lot of people like Klaus out there. And number two is, I believe especially it's people like you in this room who need to do the engaging and tell the story even in a better way than I can. And tell one particular part of the story, which is this mid-sized farm story. Because Klaus, unfortunately, is too big to pack up a pickup truck and sell at the farmer's market, and he's too small to deal in this, Walmartification of the food system. So he's very much stuck in the no man's land of the middle farmers. And we tend, I think, too much in this movement to romanticize the small farmer and the farmer's market farmer. These farmers like Klaus, and I'd say he's on the small scale of the mid-sized farmers. They still represent 40% of the farms producing food for us. And in the census, if you read that carefully, not even carefully, you read it in the first line, the farms that are hurting the most are Klaus's. They're dying. It's a slaughter, what it is. And we're looking at, as people who know about this kind of stuff, we're looking at 10 years before the mid-sized farm disappears for all intents and purposes. It's going to disappear if we continue this way. It's going to be big, and the small farmer actually who has the direct access is doing okay according to the census. And I think we all also intuitively know that. It's harder to tell this story, this mid-sized farm story, but it's critical. And then the third, that was two lessons. The third lesson is sort of that we can, I have a responsibility here. I put some responsibility on everyone in this room, but I have a big responsibility because I learned that this system really doesn't work unless it's tethered to a cuisine. When I say cuisine, it's hard because that gives these connotations that are kind of rarefied, and really what I'm talking about is a pattern of eating. I don't know another way to say it. If anyone has another word for cuisine, I'd love it. I don't have it, but it's a pattern of eating that doesn't allow you or doesn't allow me to cherry pick what I want and call myself a farm-to-table chef. I can't go to the farmer's market and say, I want a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, and if you don't have what I'm looking for, I'll get it from another farmer, or, God forbid, I dip into the industrial food chain and I get it that way. But I still get to call myself local because I really am doing the right thing. And we all want to encourage that. I was that guy. I am still that guy. I'm still very much that guy. I do that. I just did it yesterday morning at the farmer's market, Like I do it every day. And what we need to do is look at the system, at the in-between crops, really, and figure out a way to cook with them, which is why these cover crops, I think, is my new challenge. Or my life right now is spent figuring out how to transform cover crops into something edible for my restaurant. It's incredible. It's a whole nother story of this, which I didn't understand. Like those mustard greens, I said I make a puree of them, and brassicas. We think of mustards and mustard cover. Klaus grows thousands of acres of edible mustards. These are not bred specifically for cover. These are seeds that are edible. These are like your mesclun salad mix. That's what it is, salad bowl. But nobody's taking these young shoots of them that are fantastic. So we go up to the farm, we load up 1,000 black bags of these like pea shoots for the cow peas. Austrian winter peas is a fantastic cover that he uses for bag feed and for nitrogen fixation in his soil. But the shoots are a couple thousand acres of these gorgeous pea tendrils. And when I'm there, I take it, and they last like 2 weeks in the refrigerator. So there's no distribution that's crazy. I'm going out with a black garbage bag and harvesting them with other cooks or whatever, or by myself. I was doing it a couple times. So it's nuts. But you start to think like there's a lot of food out there, and taking something like that does not deprive the soil of its fertility. It's sharing. It's giving a little bit for us. It is actually incentivizing a farmer like Klaus to grow cover crops because it's not lost real estate. It means that crop doesn't go towards an investment in a future. What we're doing is paying for the wheat or the corn or whatever. He's inflating the price because he knows that he's tying up real estate to get there, right? I never thought of it that way. That's why I said I think of rotational crops as this this sort of thing that farmers need to do. But we also need to support that and incentivize that. And for a farmer like Klaus, tying up his real estate in all of these in-between crops is it's a big deal. And if he knew that he was going to if he knew he was going to get an economy out of it, he wouldn't be doing anything differently because that's the way he is. There are a lot of farmers out there, I bet, who would do something differently if they knew that we could have a distribution system in place and chefs and restaurants and institutions that would be supporting that because they want the wheat and because they want the barley or because they want all these other crops. So it's an important point that I lost. But what we as chefs need to do is I don't want to take the blame off me because the thing is I need to create a pattern of eating that dictates that I do that. That dictates that I look at the whole system. And that includes the cover crops, that includes the nitrogen fixation crops, that includes the veal, it includes the chickens, it includes the pork. And when I say I got rid of menus, that's why, because I can't do that in an a la carte menu format. And so much of this, which is why I believe so strongly in edible, is the culture. Is we need to change the culture. And farm to table doesn't change the culture enough. It's too passive, and it gives us an out too easily. And it's not, where the next census is going to be even worse if we don't figure this out. And I believe that the way to figure this out is through eating in a pattern. And I say cuisine for lack of a better term. I got to figure out a better one because everyone always sort of says cuisine. I was thinking French and whatever. And so what I mean is actually is French and Italian and Cantonese and all the great cuisines of the world evolved with this thinking. How do you support what the land can give? Not the other way around. We didn't choose and pick. That's not how cuisine developed. Cuisine developed because we were using what truly supported the ecological functioning of the farm. And that's what we need to get back to, and we need chefs to figure out these recipes. And unfortunately, I don't have a cuisine from which to launch. I don't know what a Hudson Valley cuisine is. I really don't. There is no Hudson Valley cuisine, actually, I would argue. Which is to say, there's a lot of products that are incredible from the Hudson Valley, but there hasn't been a culture, a group of chefs, a group of peasants, however you, farmers, peasants, whatever you say, that have put it together into a pattern of eating that makes sense. And we can look back at Italian cuisine, which is peasant Italian, or French, which is peasant French, and all of them develop ways to use these in-between crops. And we can talk about that in a conversation. But that's the lesson for me, and the challenge, I think, for the next 5 years or 10 years, or really a lifetime, is to create this pattern of eating around supporting a farming system that truly creates change from the ground up. Okay, thank you. I think we're going to take questions. Am I staying up? I'm staying up here.
We have time for about 10 minutes for question and answer, and it would be great if people would just come up and you can ask your questions right here. Come on over.
Oh, geez, I talked for a long time. I just saw the time I talked for. Sorry. Hello.
Hello, Chef. I actually come to Edible as a new publisher. I was a chef of my own restaurant for a number of years and tried very hard to utilize this model of using what my farms were producing. And one of the biggest challenges I see in my market is how do we democratize this way of eating? I think it's really great when, I could charge $27, $28 for a plate because that fed my farmer, it fed my workers, but it really reduced the number of people whose lives I could influence and change. Yeah. So there's a challenge there, and I'm not expecting you have the panacea, but what do you think we can do to try to democratize the access to food like this?
Well, I think like the backbone of what I'm saying is the democratization of this because once again, when you create an economy for the kinds of things that Klaus is doing because he's that kind of farmer, you spread that gospel to other farmers who from my meeting in this book, I met a lot of farmers over the years, but I've really branched out with the research of this book. It's like everyone wants to grow cover crops. I mean, I don't know a lot of farmers that don't. I don't know anyone. I've never met one. I'm sure they're out there. I've never met one. Mm-hmm. And the ones who don't do it or don't do it with the intensity and intelligence of Klaus would do it quickly if we were encouraging them and not because we're writing about them or because I'm celebrating them on my menu by their name and I'm choosing the crops that I want from that. They would do it if we create an economy around it. It's why, I don't know the short-term answer to your question. I don't know if anyone does. I don't think there is one answer anyway. There's never one answer to these kinds of things because it's so complicated and you want to have an immediate response to making sure that the working American has access to the pleasure of this kind of food and the health of this kind of food. But the truth is, there's gonna be a bit of a time frame here where that's not gonna happen. We're in it now, and how do we transition out of it? And I think one way to do it is to create a culture around supporting the whole farm. And when I say the whole farm, I stress again, I don't mean farm to table because it's a cheap way out. And in part, the reason that we get pinned as these elitist, people is because we are cherry picking. And when we cherry pick, the farmer is passing on the cost. This is all in an organic system. In an industrial system, of course, you just spray this thing and you don't have to do rotation. So that sort of goes without saying. But in an organic system, a big part of the reason that these crops are so expensive, that Klaus's wheat is so expensive, is because you're paying for the cover crop. You just don't see it. It's the sunk cost. And we have to help with that. You can't take the cover crop and eat the whole thing because then the soil doesn't get it. So we have to balance this. But that's part of what cuisine should do. And so I believe that the answer is this whole presentation, but it's going to roll out over a course of time. And you all are going to create the culture. That's what I think. Thank you. Good luck at Edible. Go Edible.
Good morning, Chef. Thank you
Hi.
for being here. My name's Kurt Fries. I publish Edible Iowa.
Iowa?
Yes, sir.
Oh,
and
shit.
I also own a...
No, great, man. I hope I didn't say anything bad about
No,
it.
not at all. And I also run a restaurant there. I'm a chef myself. And I think this follows fairly nicely on to the question that Mary was asking and a little bit about what I'm going to be talking about later today, shameless plug department,
Yeah.
is don't you think that the missing link in all of this is that people either never learned or have forgotten how to cook?
Yeah.
Nobody cooks anymore. They think it's too expensive or too time-consuming or too difficult, and obviously it's none of those things. So how do we incentivize that? How do we get people to start cooking again?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's, Michael Pollan's book, I think brilliant new book, Cooked, asked that question in more ways than one. And, this I don't know. I don't know. I'd like to say that chefs are inspiring people to cook with all of the attention that we get for everything these days. But I don't know that that's true. I don't see it in people actually cooking fresh food. So I think, though, that a good place to start is with restaurants. I mean, I really do. I think we think of restaurants as the epitome of like the saviors for farm to table, but in fact we probably haven't skimmed the surface of what restaurants and institutions can do. The people who are cooking or have to cook. Increasing, of course, the pre-cooked and there's an industrialization of food service in ways that are really hard to look at, hard to think about. But for the restaurants that are cooking, there's something to be said for digging deeper into understanding what they're doing, and hopefully, you know, around this culture idea, we pay more attention to the pleasures around the table. I mean, that's what you guys are all doing, and to that extent, I think farm to table is actually sort of working. It's small. It's going to take a long time, but I don't know. At the end of the day, it's like I don't feel like I don't feel depressed about this idea. I don't feel overwhelmed by this idea that no one's cooking anymore, because I do think that we while we've lost a generation, there's such excitement and passion around this that we're going to turn the tide. So. I hope that helps a little bit. Thank you. Good luck in Iowa. Hello.
Hey, good morning. I'm Jared Flesher, editor of Edible Jersey magazine. Front page news yesterday was the U.S. climate assessment, which essentially said that you know, climate change is here and it's already driving extreme weather, drought in the west, you know, flooding in the east. And you know, if you want to argue that, you know, the food movement hasn't been very successful yet, I think you could argue the climate movement has been very, 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 very unsuccessful. And if one of the priorities is helping farmers, you know, one of the best things you could do, obviously, is save the climate. And I think being part of the food movement is probably a lot more fun than being part of the climate movement. In which ways do you think that the food movement can help carry the climate movement, you know, a little further down the road?
Yeah. You know, I'll just tell you what I know, which is like, I would say eat more wheat, the right kind of wheat. It's an odd way to answer your question, but look at page 2 of the New York Times today, and you'll see where Wonder Bread gives their corporate donations. It's unbelievable. It's really they're the largest givers of the largest corporate givers to the Republican Party. And I'm not making a political statement here at all. I am only saying that it's very interesting that Wonder Bread, which really dictates what in the wheat industry is called the Wonder Breadification of the food system. I call it about the Walmartification of the food system. The Wonder Breadification of the food system. You know, we have 60 million acres of wheat. I'm trying to link this to the environment in the way that I can best answer it. 60 million acres of wheat. Now, 95% of that, 98% of it, is dictated by the Wonder Breads. And not Wonder Bread itself, although it's close, but Wonder Bread affects everyone else because of the price. And what is Wonder Breads of the world looking for? They're looking for high protein percentage wheat. They're looking for high protein percentage wheat because, very simply, I learned this all in a wave of research that, again, was a whole nother book. But they're doing it, they're looking for this high percentage protein because they are able to mix their dough faster, they're able to proof it faster, and they're able to bake it faster. So if you do all those 3 things, what happens? You're able to bake more bread per hour, per factory, you get more loaves in the hands and you get cheaper prices. So it actually, if you follow that chain, it goes back to protein because they need the scaffolding, they need the strength of the dough to make that bread work. Now, I'm sorry, it's going to take a minute to unpack because as it usually does with me, but the interesting thing that I learned about high percentage protein, we're talking really high, 16%. That's what farmers are shooting for. 15.5, 16.5, 17% protein. That is like no other time in history. It is like no other time in history. We never could get above 14 consistently, really. We're getting those numbers because of breeding, but we're getting it because of nitrogen. We're getting it because of fertilizer. And what happens on about 60 million acres is a blast of fertilizer that goes into a wheat crop about 3 or 4 weeks before it's harvested. 80% of that nitrogen flows into the Mississippi and then into the Gulf of Mexico. About 20% of it is taken up by the plant, by the wheat plant, and about 10% of it boosts the nitrogen level a point or two. Boosting the nitrogen level a point or two gets a wheat farmer to sell his or her crop at a premium. But what are they selling? They're selling a high-protein wheat that one could argue is causing a lot of problems for our nutrition and our diet. That's a whole nother subject. We really aren't able to digest that kind of high-protein wheat, and that's becoming more and more clear. But it's also, by the way, I would just argue that in France, there are laws against producing wheat above 12%. I haven't heard anyone complain about French bread. 16% is nuts. Anything above 14% is a little nuts, unless you're a Wonder Bread. Unless you want to produce as much loaves of bread as they are called to produce, so they are telling us we need to produce. And so the whole system is geared towards that. My argument is just an ecological one. It's not a flavor one. It's an ecological one. Where all the nitrogen that's going to support that, it's flowing out of the soils, can't hold on to it. The wheat doesn't even need it. But the 10% that it takes is bolstering that protein content so it can sell at the highest possible profit, right? Now, if you backtrack all of that and you say, well, what if we had a wheat system that we had to, wheat is the #1 crop after corn. I'm not talking edible crop. I mean, so much of corn goes into sugar and to fuel and whatnot. I'm talking about the edible crop. We're a wheat nation. We're a wheat world. And if we were to change the face of wheat and look at it the way Klaus looks at it in these rotations, we would cut down on the use of nitrogen and we'd cut down on these protein percentages. It would be a lot healthier. By the way, it tastes a lot better. But the main issue is that our soils would have the holding capacity that it needs to help with the climate issue. So these things become, this page 2 of the New York Times becomes very, very interesting in this whole debate of climate change. No one's really linking the two, but it's right there. It's right there. And yeah, you could say, well, wheat is only 60 million acres, and we really need to deal with this on an even bigger level. Okay, I don't know the bigger level. I only know it through food. And I say, on a food level, there's nothing bigger than attacking the bread culture. Nothing. Zero. Because they are driving the worst kind of agriculture, and it is, in small part, driving the worst kind of climate change for the future. I hope that answers a little bit of it. Thanks.
Hi, Dan. I'm Kendra Lott. I'm the publisher of Edible Orlando, and as you might guess, ours is a market where farm to table and nose to tail are still aspirational.
I know you experience this probably every year you do this. I don't know, but this is awesome, isn't it? I mean, it's just awesome. Edible Orlando, awesome.
Yeah, who'd have thought?
Edible Iowa. I don't know. I think it's just awesome. It's really a great thing to start your day with these kind of comments. Anyway, yes, sorry.
Well, farm to table and nose to tail and these kind of concepts, and I challenge the other wordsmiths in the room to please come up with a fabulous hyphenated catchphrase for what Dan has so beautifully described up here.
The third plate.
The third plate? Okay. All right.
I tried.
All right. Even without the hyphens. I love it. But how do we educate chefs? How do we appeal to the chefs in our market, only a handful of whom have embraced farm to table and nose to tail, which are, as you've illustrated, just part of that puzzle? Yeah. How to appeal to them?
You know, the thing is, though, that like, I don't know Orlando, but I know chefs like really well now, and I don't know a chef who's not beyond giving lip service to this. I know a lot of chefs who do a lot of things that they're not proud of, or that we would look at and be like, how can you call yourself like supporting the cause that we're all here? I mean, you're a joke. But as I look at that more carefully, like, I really have a tremendous amount of respect for every chef that even tries and that even dips their toe or her toe into this, because, you know, it's really hard. It's really hard, especially in a place like Orlando, let's say, where you don't get the mojo for doing it. And for me, I'm like really blessed. You know, I'm in business with my brother, and I have Mr. Rockefeller, who opened another restaurant for us. And you know, while my food costs are really high, I don't have a group of investors who would fire me if my food costs go over 29%. That is the reality for 99% of chefs in the country. Now, if you look at the way the restaurant business works, is you've got 3 expenses: rent, labor, and in that I include healthcare, and food costs. So if your rent's not budging, or it's going up, and you're paying your workers, and healthcare is about to become what it's about to become, by the way, a huge problem for the industry, huge problem. Where do you cut costs? Like, what do you do? So I want chefs to be more involved, and I think we can be harder on them, and many people are. But the truth is, the way the system's set up now, it's very hard to spend the money and still keep your job. That's the truth. But I always say this, the way in is through the stories with the chefs, because man, I mean, I don't know a chef. I mean, if you're a chef, you're there because you want to do the right thing. I mean, it's just like you're in the food service industry. It's like there's no industry like it. And there is no industry like it, and there's no chef that gives of themselves like the food industry. And I like chefs in the food industry. I am constantly overwhelmed by that. They don't necessarily do it for farm to table. They do it in a variety of different ways, through their customers, through efforts in their community and beyond. But they're the most giving and the most humane and most conscientious. Once you hook a chef, once you get a chef, they're dogged about supporting it. And I think, a lot of it's going to take, door-to-door, bottom-up stuff. I've been talking a lot about top-down, which is create a culture, and then it, like the Republicans say, it trickles down. And in this case, I sort of believe it. In the case that you're talking about, you got to hit them at the bottom and get them in with a story of one farmer, one product. Not this whole thing. This just, for most chefs, it's hard to think this way. And so the best way to do it is get chefs to create a pattern of eating that then becomes replicable. That's important. Replicate the pattern of eating, and you've got, a big change coming on. But I feel for you, because I get this question a lot, and I don't want to be Pollyannish about the idea that all chefs are going to be embracing this movement in the way that we all want them to. There's a transition time, but I think your magazine and the work you're doing, especially in Orlando and Iowa and elsewhere, is like it's the key. It is the key. Thank you. One more. Okay, quick. I won't go on too long.
Hi, Chef. I've been told to keep this to a 1-minute question.
But tell me,
and
where are
answer.
you?
My name's Samantha Wallace. I'm from, I'm sure you know, the Upcountry, which is South Carolina, near the mountains.
Sure.
We don't have big 2,000-acre farms where we are, much less organically farmed farms. So what I keep thinking about is, how do I convey this to my little world? How do I try to enact change right where I am with people who can relate to what I'm talking about? And so I'm wondering, how would you change the vocabulary, if at all, to this idea of the third plate?
Can I tell you something? I'll just cut you off because I know your question, and I think it's awesome. But I'm so excited we can end on this, because you are the example that you have it easy compared to everyone else in this room. And I'm so jealous of you and the chefs down there, because you actually have a cuisine. You actually have something that you can tether to. Your history, the culture of Southern living is embedded in the rotations, actually. I mean, in your dishes, you have dishes that are really I say this in the book, and I have, no one's ever said this is wrong or yet. Actually, the book's not out yet, so I have to wait for that. But Southern cuisine is the only American cuisine. There is no California cuisine. There is no, there's pockets of places, regions that have incredible produce, actually everywhere. We're a rich country with that. But no one's put it together like Southern cuisine, right? And the Carolina Rice Kitchen is a great example of an area of a cuisine that arrived out of a culture. By the way, it arrived from desperation of failing soils, and this drove the Wonder Bread, because the farmers dropped their plows, and they went to the Midwest and they planted. And the people who were left behind, largely slaves, but also landowners, had to figure out how to regenerate the soil, and they did it through cuisine. It was the most exciting culinary moment in our country's history. Also a very sad moment with the reality of slavery, but it was an exciting culinary moment because it was in desperation that they had to figure it out. So the entire rotations of Hoppin' John's is just one example of what I'm talking about. What's Hoppin' John's? Hoppin' John's is rice and peas, but everyone figured out that you couldn't keep growing. Rice country collapsed until they started putting in things like beans and collards to soak up the salt, and sweet potatoes for the fertility. And you kept going around. All of a sudden, you created this cuisine. You created dishes out of it and a culture out of it. You have that chance to tether. If you know, this is it. I'm just going to say, like, you look at, but here's the most positive example we can end this day with, is look at Rene Redzepi. How many of you have not heard of Rene Redzepi? Anybody in this room not heard of Rene Redzepi? I mean, think what you want of Noma. I think it's an amazing restaurant. But my level of respect for that restaurant is that Rene, took, and Klaus Meyer, who started the restaurant, they took Viking cuisine. Can anyone tell me what Viking cuisine is? right? Herring. Did someone say herring? It's herring. And they built this whole scaffolding of modern support for Copenhagen and Denmark, foraging and agriculture, whipped in with history, but they tethered it to something that was true to the place. Oh, and look what happened. Look what happened. I mean, explosion. Now, that's not just an explosion in his being the #1 restaurant in the world. The tourism agency is behind him now. Tourism, since his #1 a few years ago, spiked 30%. 30%. Farms have begun artisanal production, and restaurants and food service all in Denmark and around Copenhagen and around the world are supporting it. That's real change, no joke. That's real change. So you have that opportunity. I mean, Sean Brock is a good example down there. There's a lot of other great chefs that are tethering to something very real. I feel so frustrated because I don't have that, and I'm trying to kind of reinvent it, and I don't know where I'm going. But you have a place to look that you can modernize and bring into the future that is based on real agriculture that was sustainable. And I think that's like the most delicious future possible. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.